5 signs a narcissist has received his karma. Silently. They might look like they're winning right now, but God's already moving. You may think they got away with it, the lies, the manipulation, the cold betrayal that left you sitting in silence just to keep yourself from falling apart. They trashed your name behind your back, smiled to your face, and crushed your spirit without a second thought. And somehow they walked away like they won. But let this sink in. No one gets away with anything forever. Not in this life or the next. God might seem quiet, but he's never checked out. His justice doesn't need to be loud. It comes quietly, but it hits deep, shaking everything fake to its core. You might not always see it happen, but when God steps in, when he takes back what was wrongly taken or broken, he does it in a way that hits the soul. So, while the narcissist puts on a show like they're thriving, there's something they can't hide. Karma's already caught up. The hurt they caused is finding its way back, not out of revenge but as a divine response. Here are 5 signs that karma is already knocking, and God is making moves silently. They act like they're happier than ever, but it's all a performance. They will smile like they've been set free, laugh louder, walk taller, and show the world a version of themselves that looks healed, whole, and unbothered. Their social media becomes a theater filled with cheerful captions, vacation photos, coffee shop selfies, and affirmations about self-love and new beginnings. At first glance, it's hard to process. After everything they put you through, after the lying, the gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, and the betrayal, this is what they get: a spotlight, applause, and freedom. If you're not grounded in truth, your heart might start to slip into a dangerous place. The enemy whispers, "Look at them. They're doing better without you. Maybe it really was your fault. Maybe you were the weight they had to shed to find their joy." But here's the reality. The narcissist happiness is not healing. It's camouflage. It's not transformation. It's a last-ditch performance to maintain control over the story they've told themselves and others. Because no one walks away from someone who loved them purely and walks directly into peace. Not when the love they walked away from was rooted in prayer, forgiveness, and the covering of God's grace. You were not just someone. You were a shelter, a shield. You were the person who stood in spiritual warfare for them when they didn't even realize what was attacking them. You were their peace, their intercessor, their last connection to the divine. And they mocked it. They mishandled it. They betrayed it. So now, they overcompensate. They try to laugh louder than the guilt, try to outshine the shame, rush into new relationships, hoping to replicate what they destroyed. But the reality is this: you cannot replace what was sent by God with something man-made. You can't recreate peace with pleasure. You can't silence conviction with chaos. And you absolutely cannot hide from God's voice by increasing your volume on social media. That smile they flash, it cracks when the camera turns off. That glow they project, it dims in the silence of their own conscience. Because no matter how much they perform, they still have to lie down at night with a soul that knows the truth. They know what they lost. They may not say it. They may never admit it to anyone, not even to themselves. But they feel it every single day. They feel it when something good happens, and they can't fully enjoy it. They feel it when they look into the eyes of someone new and don't see the same light they once saw in yours. They feel it when they reach for comfort and find shallowness, when they need prayer but have no one who knows how to pray. They feel it when they try to forget you, because the truth is you cannot walk away from God's protection, spit on his grace and come out unscathed. Galatians 6:7 says, "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows." The narcissist is not reaping joy. They're reaping denial. And denial always feels good for a season. It's a warm blanket on a cold night, until the storm comes. And when the storm comes, it rips every illusion apart. You'll know it's happening when they start to sound louder than usual, when their updates seem exaggerated, when they try too hard to look peaceful. Real peace doesn't advertise itself. Real healing doesn't need witnesses. When you've been truly restored by God, you don't need to announce it. You radiate it. So when you see them acting like everything is perfect, don't envy them. Don't wish for their life. Don't think for a second that they are getting away with what they did. Because while they may fool the world, They are not fooling God, and they are certainly not fooling their own soul. That's why they keep performing. Because deep down, they know something is missing. And it's not just you. It's who they were when they had you. That version of themselves. The one who was covered by your prayers, who was growing because of your grace, who had access to your peace. That version is gone. What's left is the shell, the actor, the curated persona. You, on the other hand, are walking in truth now. You're being healed in ways that don't need to be posted. You're finding joy that isn't flashy but rooted. You're growing in the shadow of God's presence, quietly, deeply, and permanently. So let them perform. Let them act. Let them build their image. But know this, God is not interested in the show. He sees what man cannot. He examines the heart. And while others may be clapping, God may already be closing the curtain. One day that performance will end. The mask will slip. The applause will fade. And they'll be left with nothing but the truth they spent so long trying to outrun. By then it will be too late to reach for what they lost, because by then you will be out of reach. 2. God begins taking back what they once held carelessly. A lot of people live under a dangerous lie. The idea that God's mercy means He won't ever respond. That just because lightning didn't strike the moment they lied, betrayed, abandoned, or mocked your loyalty, they must have gotten away with it. Maybe God didn't notice. Maybe there won't be any fallout. But that's not how it works. God isn't blind. He's not late, and He's definitely not fooled. When someone mistreats what God gave them, when they take for granted a heart that stayed when everyone else walked away, a spirit that prayed through storms they caused, and a love that forgave even through the pain, God's response doesn't always show up as fire from the sky. Sometimes it looks like quiet, intentional removal. God starts taking back what they never respected. And at first, they don't even realize it. That's part of the judgment. He lets them believe they're still in control. But then things begin to change. The people they leaned on start to pull away. What used to be easy starts feeling like a constant struggle. The favor they once had in relationships, money, influence, starts drying up. Not in one big crash, but in slow, subtle ways. One piece at a time. A friend no longer calls. A door that once opened quickly now remains closed. Opportunities vanish without explanation. And then isolation creeps in. Because God doesn't have to destroy someone publicly to correct them completely. He simply begins to take away the grace they once stood under. The very grace they didn't recognize was flowing through you. You were not just a friend, partner, or spouse. You were a vessel, a covering, a divine shield. You stood between them and a storm they didn't know was coming. And when they dishonored you, they dishonored the God who assigned you to that place in their life. That is not a small offense. That is spiritual negligence. That is pride. And pride always precedes the fall. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." God resists the proud, Scripture says, but gives grace to the humble. When someone walks away from His grace, especially when they treat it with contempt, He lets them feel what life looks like without it. The punishment is not the chaos. The punishment is the absence of divine order. They once had peace without asking for it, because you brought it. They once had someone interceding for them, because you fasted, you prayed, you wept in secret places for their soul. They once had loyalty but called it neediness. They once had stability but mocked it as boring. They once had real love but treated it like an inconvenience. So God stepped back. And now they're realizing what's gone is not just you. It's what God was doing through you. And that is irreplaceable. They try to fill the space with new people, new hobbies, new goals. They try to drown the silence and noise, but nothing works, because the subtraction is spiritual. And until the heart is humbled, until repentance comes, until they acknowledge not just what they lost, but how they lost it, God will continue withdrawing. He will keep subtracting, until they understand, you don't get to keep what you refuse to honor. And here's the mercy of it all. Because yes, even in judgment, God is still merciful. He doesn't take everything at once. He gives them a chance to notice, to repent, to turn around. But if they don't, if they harden their hearts, the unraveling continues. and they will sit in the ruins of what could have been a testimony, but instead becomes a cautionary tale. So, if you're watching this and still grieving over the relationship, the friendship, the connection they walked away from, breathe. Let God be God. You don't have to make them see your worth. God already knows your worth, and He's showing them now, not by arguing, not by proving, but by removing. Every loss they now experience will echo your absence. Every closed door will remind them of the ones you kept open. Every moment of confusion will carry the haunting reality. They had something sacred and they lost it. And what about you? You don't have to fight. You don't have to chase. You don't have to prove. You just have to heal. You just have to stay in alignment with God. Because while He is subtracting from them, He is preparing restoration for you. He is multiplying where you were emptied. He is planting where you were stripped. He is building where they tried to break you. So walk forward. Walk in faith. Walk knowing that heaven saw it all. God has started removing what they held carelessly, and He is about to replace what you gave sacrificially with something you'll never have to beg to be valued again. Comment below with the words, God saw it all, and He's already removing what dishonored me. Let this be your declaration. I will not mourn what God has removed. I will rejoice in what He's restoring. 3. They talk in circles, but you're still at the center of every sentence. They'll never say your name, not out loud, not in public, not where anyone else can hear it, because saying your name would mean telling the truth, and the truth demands humility, and that's something the narcissist gave up a long time ago. Instead, they hide behind metaphors, cryptic captions, and poetic one-liners meant to sting without taking responsibility. At first, it might sound like growth, like they're reflecting, healing, moving on. But if you really pay attention, not just with your ears, but with your gut, you'll hear something else. You'll hear pieces of your story, twisted and blurred, showing up in posts about betrayal, fake friends, lessons learned, or guarding their peace. And if you know them, and you do, you'll catch the tone. You'll feel the guilt behind the words, because this isn't healing, it's haunting. The narcissist can't stop circling around the one thing they swear doesn't bother them. You. They dress their words in armor, use vague stories as shields, and keep their distance like it proves something. But what they can't do, what they'll never be able to do, is talk about you without something inside them shaking, because no matter how far they run, you're still the mirror they can't crack. You're the reminder of the part of themselves they lost, the part that once had something real and ruined it. They say things like, some people just don't deserve me, when the truth is, they didn't know how to honor someone who saw them completely and loved them anyway. They say, I've learned to love myself, when the truth is, they've only learned how to avoid the shame of losing someone sacred. They say, not everyone is meant to stay in your life, when the truth is, they were the one who walked away from the very thing God was trying to use to heal them. You were never just another chapter. You were the turning point, the place where they could have grown, could have changed, could have become more than the image they protect so desperately. And now that you're gone, truly gone, the silence they once craved is choking them. Because narcissists don't mourn people, they mourn control. They don't miss you, they miss how you made them feel about themselves. The attention, the admiration, the unconditional support. But now that you've stepped away, now that your energy, your light, your prayer, your covering is gone, they're lost. And they won't say it, but you'll hear it in everything they refuse to say clearly. It shows up when they watch your stories in secret, when they post something just vague enough that only you would understand, when they try to bait a reaction not because they care about reconciliation, but because your silence is louder than anything they've ever said. Because that's what haunts someone who lives in deception, the absence of the one who told them the truth. They may still try to rewrite the narrative. They may tell others that you were too emotional, too intense, They may twist the story so that they look like the one who escaped something toxic. But no matter how they rearrange the facts, the truth is embedded in every line they deliver. They are still talking about you because they are still affected by you, and they will be for a long time. Because when someone discards a person sent by God, someone full of mercy, prayer, and patience, They don't just lose that person. They lose the version of themselves that was becoming better because of that person. And that loss is not recoverable through a new relationship, a new job, or a new identity. They'll keep posting. They'll keep hinting. They'll keep telling themselves they're healed. But no one lies louder than someone who cannot accept the truth, and no one performs harder than someone who's being eaten alive by conviction. That's why their words feel empty, because they speak in circles, not to process pain, but to avoid accountability, not to reflect, but to redirect, and every time they do, they draw the circle wider. Yet somehow, you're still in the center of it, because your absence has become the gravity in their world. They are orbiting a memory, a wound they can't clean, a truth they can't deny. But you're free now. You don't need to defend yourself anymore. You don't need to reply. You don't need to explain, because when someone keeps talking in circles while pretending they're healed, it only reveals one thing: they left you, but you never really left them. 4. They no longer believe in others, and quietly, they stop believing in themselves. It starts off quietly. They say they're just setting boundaries. They talk like they've finally wised up, like they're learning to protect their heart and be more careful with their energy. You'll hear things like, "I just don't trust people anymore," or "everyone lets you down," as if what they're doing is coming from a place of strength. But underneath the calm words, the cool distance, and the confident act, there's something much more fragile and honestly, a lot scarier. They're not setting healthy boundaries. They're building walls, not because the world did them wrong, but because they did wrong to someone who didn't deserve it. And now anyone who even slightly reminds them of the one they hurt feels like a threat. What they don't see or can't face is that they're not really afraid of other people. They're afraid of themselves. Because once you hurt someone who truly cared, once you looked into kind eyes and chose to walk away without blinking, once you destroyed the one safe place that held your chaos, you start to question what kind of person you really are. And that questioning slowly turns into suspicion, not just toward others, but toward your own ability to love, to tell what's real, to truly connect. You start believing everyone else must be like you, that they'll lie, pretend, manipulate, and eventually leave. That's a punishment no courtroom hands down. It doesn't need to be public. It's personal, and it cuts the deepest, because it comes from within, a slow, silent breakdown of trust in your own soul. They no longer believe others because they know what they themselves did when someone believed in them, and that memory is now their tormentor. They used to be carefree, loud, charismatic. They used to speak with certainty, with charm, with ease. But now their tone has changed. There's hesitation. There's a tremble in their interactions, even if it's hidden behind sarcasm or bravado. They hesitate before opening up. They scan every gesture, every text, every silence, not because people are being deceptive, but because they themselves once were. And now they assume everyone's playing a game. That is karma in its most intimate form, not destruction from the outside, but corrosion from the inside. Not loud chaos, but quiet decay. They're suspicious now of kindness, because they know how they once weaponized it. They're skeptical of sincerity, because they remember how they twisted it to their advantage. They question love, not because love failed them, but because they failed love, and what was once a steady confidence becomes fragmented, a fortress of ego built over a rotting foundation. Because when you break someone who was sent to heal you, when you mock the very presence of God in someone's life who covered you in prayer and stood by your side, the aftershock is not public shame, but private emptiness. They're surrounded by people now, but they feel alone. They hear praise, but it doesn't register. They seek validation, but it never lands, because none of it can compete with the quiet voice inside that says, "You broke something holy." That voice isn't loud, but it's persistent. And in the stillness, it grows. And the irony? It sounds a lot like you. Not your words, but your presence. That calm, grounded, merciful energy you carried was the last thing that made them feel truly safe. And now, no matter how many people surround them, no matter how much they try to reinvent themselves, they can't recreate what your presence gave them. not because you were perfect, but because God was working through you. And now that you're gone, that presence is gone too. So they isolate. They withdraw not as a decision, but as a reflex, because they know deep down that they no longer deserve what they once rejected. And that realization becomes a chain around their soul. It's not just loneliness. It's not just regret. It's the terrifying suspicion that they are now unreachable, even to themselves. Because when you stop believing in others, the final consequence is that you stop believing in the possibility of who you could have become, and that's the tragedy. They didn't just lose you, they lost the future version of themselves, the healed, redeemed, softened version that only existed when they were loved by someone like you, and they'll never see that version again. 5. They meet the very same version of themselves they once were. There's a certain kind of justice that doesn't come through punishment, public exposure, or shame. It comes through something much quieter, through reflection, and not just emotionally, but literally. It happens when God lets someone come face to face with the version of themselves they've spent so much time trying to hide, defend, or explain away. Only now, they see it reflected back through someone else, someone who treats them exactly how they once treated you. At first, they won't even notice it. In fact, they'll be drawn to this new person. The spark feels unreal. The attention is addictive. They feel seen, chosen, and wanted, just like they made you feel in the beginning. They'll gush to their friends, saying, "This one's different. This one really understands me." And for a while they'll believe they've finally found real love. But what they don't see yet is they haven't met their perfect match. They've met their mirror, and it won't fall apart overnight. That would be too simple. This kind of reckoning is slow, precise, and intentional, and that's exactly why it cuts so deep. At first, there will be subtle dismissals, small jabs at their insecurities, quiet withdrawals of affection. Then it escalates. The other person starts playing emotional games. One day hot, the next cold. One week, they're planning a future. The next, they're ghosting for hours, sometimes days. They're suddenly walking on eggshells, trying to figure out what went wrong, what they did, how they can fix it. And in those moments, when they're waiting on replies that never come, when they're anxiously reading messages that sound colder than usual, when they start to shrink in their own skin, something begins to stir deep in their soul. A memory, a face. This is what I did to them. They remember you. They remember the texts they ignored while you cried alone, the nights you waited in silence for a conversation that never came, the way they made you question your worth, your sanity, your value, the way you tried desperately to explain yourself to someone who never truly listened. And suddenly, they are you, except they don't have your grace. They don't have your loyalty. They don't have your God-given capacity to love beyond betrayal. The person they're dealing with now isn't praying for them, isn't covering them, isn't forgiving. The person they're with now is just like them, selfish, manipulative, and emotionally unavailable. And now they see, not in theory, but in agony, what it feels like to be treated as disposable, to be admired one minute and discarded the next, to be loved conditionally, criticized constantly, and used quietly, and no one around them sees the irony. No one connects the dots, but they do. They connect every silent rejection to the way they once dismissed your presence, every sarcastic insult to the way they mocked your vulnerability, every cold shoulder to the way they turned away when you needed warmth. This is the full circle moment. This is where God does not need to intervene with fire. He simply allows the narcissist to live through the same storm they once created. And here is where it hurts the most. It doesn't feel like justice to them. It feels like heartbreak, because unlike you, they don't have the humility to reflect. They don't have the wisdom to learn. They don't see it as discipline. They see it as cruelty. But in truth, it is neither. It is the kindness of God that brings them here, because God doesn't destroy to punish. He reflects to awaken. And when that mirror is held up, not even they can deny what they've become. They will try to escape it. They'll say the other person has issues. They'll claim, "I just have bad luck in relationships." They might even call themselves victims. But at night, when the lights go out and the pride fades, they will hear it again. that quiet voice from deep within. This is who you were. This is what you did. This is how they felt. And there will be no one to blame, no one to gaslight, no one to twist the story for, because the person hurting them now doesn't care enough to cover the truth. They're not invested enough to protect their feelings. For the first time in their life, they feel completely powerless, not because they can't control someone else anymore, but because they've lost control of the story they used to tell. There's no version left where they come out looking like the hero. The pain is obvious now, and so is where it came from. They see themselves in this new person, and it makes their skin crawl. But more than that, it scares them. Because staying means they suffer, and leaving means they have to admit the truth. Either way, they can't rewrite what really happened. They're finally being hit with the weight of their own choices. And you're not around to see it. You're not sitting around waiting for karma or wishing them harm. You're long gone, healed, whole, and held by a God who defends his people without needing a stage to do it. That's the beauty of divine justice. It doesn't need to make noise, it just reveals. And when God lets someone fall apart because they're face to face with who they really are, that's not revenge, that's mercy, delivered with consequences. That's healing, brought on by truth. They used to laugh at how deeply you felt. Now they're crying over someone who couldn't care less. They once mocked you for being too emotional. Now they're getting called dramatic for simply asking to be loved. They treated your heart like it didn't matter. Now they're begging someone to stay. Someone who won't even meet their eyes. And in the quiet, as reality finally sinks